Handle it yourself. I'm leaving the country for 10 days. The message arrived at 3:17 a.m., 3 hours before I needed to be at the office to prepare for our company's make or break investor meeting. My fingers trembled as I stared at my screen, reading and rereading the words until they burned into my brain. I called him. No answer. I texted back asking if this was some kind of joke. Nothing. I called again, straight to voicemail. That's when I knew Grant meant it. My boss, our company's CEO, had just abandoned me to face alone the disaster he had created. I sank to the floor of my apartment, still in the clothes I'd worn yesterday, having fallen asleep at my desk reviewing presentation materials. $9 million in damaged products needed explaining. 5 angry board members would be arriving in less than 6 hours. Hundreds of jobs hung in the balance, and Grant had left the country. Before I continue, I want to thank you for listening to my story. I really appreciate your time. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of these words. My name is Arya. At the time this happened, I was 32 years old and had been the chief operating officer at our tech company for just under 3 years. We made specialized equipment for small businesses, equipment that was supposed to save them money and time. I never planned on becoming an executive. Growing up in a small town with parents who worked at the local factory, I was the first in my family to go to college. I studied engineering because I loved solving problems, not because I wanted to wear suits or sit in meetings. But somehow, I ended up doing both. Grant hired me as a project manager when our company was still small, just 18 people in a renovated warehouse space. I admired him at first. He had vision. He had charm. He knew how to make people believe in possibilities. When he spoke, rooms fell quiet. When he asked for more from his team, we gave it. The problem started after our first product became successful. Grant began promising things our team couldn't deliver. He set impossible deadlines. He brushed off my concerns, saying I needed to think bigger and take more risks. The market waits for no one, Arya, he would say whenever I suggested we needed more testing. While you're perfecting, our competitors are selling. I still remember exactly how he looked the day I brought him the first warning about our newest product, the one that would eventually cost us $9 million. We were 6 months from launch. I'd discovered a potential defect in the cooling system that could cause catastrophic failure in certain conditions. We found an issue in testing, I said, placing the report on his glass desk. We need to delay the launch by at least 2 months to fix it. Grant didn't even look at the report. He was typing on his phone, barely acknowledging me. We're not delaying, he said finally, still not looking up. The investors are expecting a Q2 launch. We promised retailers we'd deliver in May. Grant, these units could fail after a few months of use. We'll have to recall them all. He finally looked at me, his expression hardening. Do you know how much a delay would cost us? The market position we'd lose? The investor confidence? Do you know how much a recall would cost us? I countered. He stood up, towering over me. This is exactly why you're still the COO and not ready for more. You see problems, not opportunities. Fix the issue before launch, without delaying. That's your job. I tried. My team worked around the clock. We managed to improve the cooling system, but our testing still showed a 3% failure rate under certain conditions. In a production run of thousands of units, that meant hundreds of inevitable failures. 3 more times I brought data to Grant. 3 more times he dismissed my concerns. The last time, 1 week before production began, he actually removed my warnings from the executive report to the board. I edited out the doom and gloom, he told me with a smile. No need to scare everyone with worst-case scenarios. That probably won't happen. But they did happen, exactly as we had predicted. 3 months after launch, the failures began. Small businesses that had trusted our product were facing expensive damages. News outlets picked up the story. Customer service was overwhelmed. Our stock price dropped 40% in a week. And tomorrow, no, today, we had to face our investors and explain how we would fix it. I had spent the past 72 hours preparing 2 different presentations. One where Grant took responsibility as the CEO. One where we shared the blame as a leadership team. I hadn't included my warnings or his dismissals in either version. I was still trying to protect him, even after everything. Now, sitting on my apartment floor at 3:23 a.m., I realized he wasn't trying to protect any of us. I forced myself to stand up. If Grant wouldn't face this crisis, I would have to do it myself. I showered, put on my best suit, and left my apartment while the city still slept. The office was empty when I arrived at 4:45 a.m. I walked through the silent hallways to my office, switched on the light, and began rewriting the entire presentation from scratch. By 7:30 a.m., other executives started arriving. Tessa from marketing, Dev from finance, and Liam from product development all stopped by my office, asking about the meeting preparations. "Where's Grant?" they each asked. I told them he was handling something off-site and would join us later. The lie tasted bitter, but I needed time to figure out what to do. At 8:45 a.m., Jenny, our receptionist, appeared at my door looking worried. "5 board members just arrived," she said quietly. "They're asking to speak with you and Grant before the full investor meeting." My heart nearly stopped. The board isn't supposed to be here until 10. They said they wanted to discuss strategy beforehand. This wasn't part of the plan. Grant was supposed to lead this meeting. He was the visionary, the spokesperson, the face of the company. I was the behind-the-scenes operator who made things work. I gathered my materials with shaking hands and followed Jenny to the main conference room. When I walked in, the tension was palpable. Elena, the head of our board, sat at the center of one side, flanked by 4 other board members, all in dark suits, all with serious expressions. "Arya," Elena said, "where is Grant?" I opened my mouth to repeat the lie about him handling something off-site, but the words wouldn't come. These people had invested millions in our company. They deserved the truth. Without speaking, I took out my phone, found Grant's message, and placed it face up on the table in front of Elena. "Handle it yourself. I'm leaving the country for 10 days. Elena read it, then passed the phone to the board member beside her. No one spoke as my phone made its way around the table. When it returned to me, Elena's expression had changed from concern to something harder. "Tell us everything," she said, "from the beginning." For the next 2 hours, I did exactly that. I pulled up email exchanges, meeting notes, test results, and timeline documents. I explained how we'd identified the cooling system problems 6 months before launch. I showed them Grant's edits, removing my warnings from reports. I detailed every attempt I'd made to address the issue, and how each had been overruled. I didn't try to make myself look good. I admitted where I could have pushed harder, where I should have escalated my concerns to the board directly. I took responsibility for not standing my ground more firmly. When I finished, Elena asked me to step out so the board could discuss privately. I waited in my office, certain I had just ended my career. I had exposed not only Grant's failures but also my own inability to prevent this disaster. 20 minutes later, I was called back in. "We've made some decisions," Elena said. "You will lead the investor meeting today. You will present your plan for the recall. You will be the point person for this recovery operation." I nodded, still expecting to hear about my termination after the crisis was handled. "As for Grant," she continued, "we will address leadership issues separately. For now, your priority is to stabilize the company and manage this recall effectively." The investor meeting that followed was the most challenging presentation of my life. I stood before 37 investors and explained exactly what had gone wrong, why it had happened, and how we planned to fix it. I didn't blame Grant by name, but I made it clear that our leadership had failed to heed internal warnings about product readiness. Then I detailed our recovery plan, a complete recall of all units, an engineered fix for the cooling system, rapid redeployment to customers, and a 2-year warranty extension as goodwill. The total cost, $9 million. "This will deplete our cash reserves," I acknowledged. "We're requesting bridge financing to ensure we can complete the recall while maintaining operations." The questions were brutal. The doubt was evident. But something unexpected happened. Because I hadn't tried to spin the situation, because I had been transparent about both the failures and the solutions, the investors responded with cautious support. By the end of the day, we had secured conditional financing. The recall could begin. We had a chance to save the company. For the next 10 days, I barely slept. My team and I worked around the clock. We contacted customers, coordinated returns, expedited the engineering fix, and rebuilt our quality control processes from the ground up. I discovered something about leadership during those 10 days. It wasn't about grand visions or inspirational speeches. It was about showing up. It was about taking responsibility. It was about standing beside your team when everything was falling apart. Every morning at 7 a.m., I held a company-wide meeting. Every evening at 7 p.m., I sent an update to all employees and the board. I was transparent about our challenges and our progress. I acknowledged mistakes and celebrated small victories. Dev from finance worked miracles to manage our dwindling cash flow. Tessa from marketing crafted messaging that was honest without being alarming. Liam from product development barely left the building as he redesigned the cooling system. Jenny from reception volunteered to help call customers when our service team was overwhelmed. I learned more about my colleagues in those 10 days than I had in 3 years. I learned that Dev played classical piano to relieve stress, that Tessa had turned down a job at a bigger company to stay with us because she believed in our mission, that Liam had a 5-year-old daughter whose drawings covered the walls of his office. I also learned about the politics Grant had been playing that I hadn't noticed before. On day 3 of Grant's absence, I was digging through old emails, looking for customer commitments, when I discovered a folder in our shared drive labeled Executive Talent. Inside were performance assessments of every senior leader, written by Grant, for the board's eyes only. My hands shook as I opened the document with my name on it. Arya continues to demonstrate strong operational capabilities, but lacks strategic vision and executive presence. Her tendency toward caution and over-analysis creates friction with innovation goals. Recommend maintaining in current role with limited advancement potential. Will need to consider external hire for succession planning. The words stung like physical wounds. I had given everything to this company. I had identified the problems that would cost us $9 million. I had been right, and Grant had been wrong. Yet he had been systematically undermining me to the board. I opened other files. Tessa was described as too focused on customer satisfaction at the expense of growth metrics. Dev was overly conservative with financial projections. Liam was talented, but not leadership. Every assessment twisted the truth to make each of us appear fundamentally limited, while positioning Grant as the visionary held back by his cautious team. I closed the files, feeling sick. This wasn't just about the product failure anymore. It was about a pattern of behavior that had been happening right under my nose. On day 5, Elena from the board called me directly. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "We're making progress," I said, avoiding the personal question. "The engineering fix is working in tests. We've contacted 78% of affected customers. The media coverage has shifted from crisis to recovery." "That's not what I asked," Elena said. Her voice softened. "How are you, Arya?" The unexpected kindness nearly broke me. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding together with sheer determination. I struggled to find words that weren't a professional mask. I'm angry and hurt and exhausted, but mostly determined not to let this company fail because of one person's bad decisions. "That's why I'm calling," Elena said. "The board has been reviewing internal communications from the past year. We've found some concerning patterns." My heart raced. Had they discovered that I'd seen Grant's secret assessments? Would they think I was trying to undermine him while he was away? "What kind of patterns?" I asked carefully. "Let's just say there are significant discrepancies between what Grant told the board and what was actually happening within the company. We'll discuss it when he returns." After we hung up, I sat at my desk, wondering what they had found. Were they looking at the same documents I'd discovered? Had others come forward with their own experiences? The days blurred together. I moved through problems mechanically, solving one crisis after another. The recall operation gained momentum. Customers began receiving fixed units. Our engineers implemented new testing protocols to prevent similar failures in the future. By day 8, I realized something unexpected was happening. The crisis was bringing our team together in ways we'd never experienced before. Without Grant's divisive leadership style, pitting departments against each other, creating artificial competition, we were collaborating efficiently. Liam's engineering team was working directly with customer service to understand field issues. Marketing and finance were aligned on customer retention strategies. Middle managers who had previously guarded information were now sharing insights openly. On day 9, Dev came to my office with budget projections. "If we continue at this pace, we'll complete the recall under budget by about $800,000, he said, sliding a spreadsheet across my desk. I stared at the numbers. How is that possible? Several reasons. The engineering fix was less expensive to implement than we initially projected. Our suppliers gave us preferential rates when they learned we were doing right by customers. And our team has been working so efficiently that labor costs are lower than expected. That's credible, I said. Dev nodded. It's because of your leadership, Arya. People want to work for someone who tells them the truth, even when it's hard. His words stayed with me that night as I drove home at 11 p.m. For the first time in 9 days, I allowed myself to think about what would happen when Grant returned tomorrow. Would he sweep in and take credit for the recovery? Would he spin a story about how his absence was strategic, giving the team space to implement his vision? Would the board believe him? I barely slept that night, playing out different scenarios in my mind. By morning, I had made a decision. I wouldn't try to expose Grant or demand recognition. I would simply present the facts of what had happened during his absence and let the results speak for themselves. I arrived at the office early on day 10, the day before Grant's scheduled return. The recall was 67% complete. Customer satisfaction scores were rebounding. Media coverage had shifted to stories about our transparency and commitment to making things right. Elena called mid-afternoon. The board would like to meet with you and Grant tomorrow at 9 a.m. Grant doesn't know about this meeting, I said. We'll inform him upon his return. Please prepare a complete briefing on the recall operation and current company status. That night, I worked until midnight creating a comprehensive presentation, not to impress the board, but to ensure every detail of our team's efforts was documented. Every decision we'd made, every challenge we'd overcome, every person who had contributed. When I finally got home, there was a new message on my phone. Landing at 7 a.m. Need full update before board meeting. Meet in my office at 8. Grant was coming back a day early. He knew about the board meeting. I didn't respond. Instead, I took a long shower and tried to prepare myself mentally for the confrontation ahead. I wasn't the same person who had read his 3 a.m. text 11 days ago. I wouldn't simply fall back into the role of making him look good at my own expense. Morning came too quickly. I dressed with unusual care, choosing a dark blue suit that I'd bought months ago, but had never had the confidence to wear. I arrived at the office at 7:30, giving myself time to center my thoughts before facing Grant. As I walked to my office, people stopped me in the hallways. They thanked me. They told me about customer calls they'd received. They shared small victories from the past 10 days. I realized that whatever happened with Grant and the board, something fundamental had changed in our company culture. People felt valued. They felt heard. They were proud of how we were handling the crisis. At precisely 8 a.m., I walked into Grant's office. He was sitting behind his desk as if he'd never left, looking tanned and rested in contrast to our exhausted team. There was no acknowledgement of his abandonment, no apology, not even recognition of the crisis he'd left behind. Arya, good, he said, barely looking up from his computer. Give me the quick version so I can prepare for the board. $9 million, I said, remaining standing. That got his attention. He looked up, frowning. What about it? That's what your decision cost this company. Your decision to ignore warnings about the cooling system. Your decision to remove those warnings from board reports. Your decision to launch a product you knew might fail. His expression hardened. If you've come to point fingers, I'm not pointing fingers, Grant. I'm stating facts. Facts that the board already knows, because I showed them the evidence while you were gone. He stood up slowly, his face flushing with anger. You had no right. I had every right, I interrupted. You left me to handle it myself, remember? So I did. I handled all of it. For a moment, he seemed at a loss for words. Then his expression shifted to the charming confidence that had once impressed me. Look, Arya, I understand you're upset, but stepping away was a calculated decision. The team needed space to implement the recovery without my presence, causing additional media scrutiny. It was strategic. I almost laughed at the audacity. Is that what you're planning to tell the board? That abandoning your company during its biggest crisis was strategic? The results speak for themselves, he said smoothly. The recall is proceeding. The company has survived. Sometimes leadership means knowing when to step back. You're right about one thing, I said. The results do speak for themselves. I turned to leave, then paused at the door. The board meeting is in 45 minutes. Everything that happened while you were gone has been documented. Every email, every decision, Every conversation. Just so you know. His confident smile faltered for just a moment, enough to tell me he understood the implications. I walked out, closing the door quietly behind me. As I headed toward the boardroom to set up my presentation, I felt a strange calm. For years, I had worried about proving myself, about being executive enough, about meeting Grant's impossible standards. Now I realized those standards had been artificially constructed to keep me in my place. The real test of leadership had come in the past 11 days. And while I hadn't been perfect, I had been present. I had been accountable. I had told the truth. 45 minutes later, I sat at the conference table, waiting for the most important meeting of my career to begin. The board members filed in, followed by Grant, who took his usual seat at the head of the table. Elena called the meeting to order with a simple question that would change everything. Grant, would you like to explain where you've been for the past 11 days while your company faced its biggest crisis? Grant leaned forward with the practiced confidence of someone who had talked his way through countless difficult situations. His smile didn't waver as he addressed Elena. As I was just explaining to Arya, my temporary absence was strategic. I recognized that my presence during the height of the media coverage could intensify scrutiny. Sometimes, leadership requires making difficult decisions for the greater good. The board members' faces remained impassive. Elena glanced at her colleagues before responding. Interesting perspective, she said. Arya, would you share your experience of the past 11 days? I opened my laptop and connected it to the projector. Rather than telling you about it, I'd like to show you exactly what happened after Grant's departure. For the next 30 minutes, I walked through a detailed timeline. The emergency team we had assembled, the engineering solution we had implemented, the customer communication strategy, the financial arrangements we had made to keep the company afloat. I showed metrics, recall completion rates, customer satisfaction scores, media sentiment analysis, employee overtime hours. I shared before and after comparisons of our quality control processes. Throughout my presentation, Grant nodded, as though approving of work done under his distant guidance. Twice he interjected with, "This follows the crisis framework I developed last year," and exactly as I would have approached it. When I finished, Elena thanked me, then turned to Grant. "You mentioned this was strategic. Did you communicate this strategy to anyone before leaving?" I felt it was best not to create unnecessary documentation that could be discovered in potential litigation, Grant said smoothly. Another board member, Harold, who rarely spoke during meetings, cleared his throat. "Grant, we've reviewed all internal communications surrounding this product failure." Grant's expression didn't change, but I noticed his hand tighten around his pen. Harold continued, "We found multiple instances where Arya and her team warned about the cooling system issue. We found evidence that you removed these warnings from reports to this board." "That's a mischaracterization," Grant said quickly. "I streamlined reports to focus on actionable items rather than theoretical concerns." Elena slid a folder across the table. "These are emails where you explicitly instructed your team to proceed despite known defects. This is the original board report with Arya's warnings highlighted, and this is the version you provided to us with those sections removed." Grant glanced at the documents without touching them. "In a fast-moving industry, we have to make judgment calls. If we halted production every time an engineer raised a concern, we'd never ship anything. And if we ignored every warning, we'd end up exactly where we are," Elena countered. $9 million in recall costs and a serious threat to our company's future. The tension in the room was palpable. Grant began a long explanation about market timing and competitive pressures. While the board listened with increasing discomfort, I remained quiet, letting his words hang in the air. This was the moment I realized I didn't need to orchestrate any elaborate exposure of Grant. He was doing it himself with every defensive statement, every deflection, every refusal to acknowledge reality. When he finally finished speaking, Elena turned to me. "Arya, did you consider going directly to the board when your concerns were dismissed?" The question was fair. Yes, and I should have, I admitted. I convinced myself that loyalty to the company meant supporting my CEO, even when I disagreed. I was wrong. I won't make that mistake again. Elena nodded, then addressed the room. "We need to discuss next steps privately. Arya, would you excuse us?" "Grant, please stay." I gathered my materials and walked out, closing the door behind me. For the next 2 hours, I sat in my office, answering emails and checking in with the recall team while waiting for whatever came next. At 11:43 a.m., my phone buzzed with a message from Elena. Please join us in the boardroom. When I entered, only the board members remained. Grant was nowhere to be seen. Please sit down, Arya, Elena said. Her expression was serious but not unkind. The board has made several decisions today, she began. First, we have accepted Grant's resignation, effective immediately. The words took a moment to register. Grant hadn't been fired. He'd resigned. Somehow, that seemed fitting. Even in his downfall, he'd managed to maintain the appearance of control. Second, Elena continued, we are appointing you as acting CEO while we conduct a formal search for a permanent replacement. I hadn't expected this. I appreciate your confidence, I said carefully, but I want to be clear that I'm not campaigning for Grant's position. We understand that, Harold said. This isn't about office politics. It's about who demonstrated actual leadership during a crisis. Over the next 15 minutes, they outlined their expectations for the transition. I would continue leading the recall operation while taking on CEO responsibilities. The board would announce Grant's departure as a mutual decision to bring new leadership aligned with the company's renewed focus on quality and customer trust. As the meeting concluded, Elena asked me to stay behind for a moment. There's something you should know, she said once we were alone. When Grant got your message about the board meeting, he sent us a lengthy email. It detailed your supposed shortcomings and suggested you were using the crisis to undermine him. I felt a chill. Even at the end, he had tried to sabotage me. What he didn't realize, Elena continued, was that we had already reviewed 3 years of communications and performance data. We knew exactly who had been telling the truth all along. That afternoon, I gathered our employees to announce the changes. I didn't disparage Grant. I didn't need to. I simply explained that we were entering a new chapter, focused on rebuilding trust, with our customers, with our investors, and with each other. 6 months later, our company had not only survived, but was growing again. The recall was complete. Our redesigned product was receiving positive reviews. We had implemented new quality control systems that became a model in our industry. The board removed acting from my title after 4 months, making me the permanent CEO. I promoted Tessa, Dev, and Liam to my executive team. Together, we built a culture where raising concerns was rewarded, not punished. I occasionally thought about Grant. I heard he had landed at a venture capital firm, telling a carefully crafted story about his departure that positioned him as the victim of a conservative board unwilling to take risks. But the people who mattered knew the truth. His own words and actions had revealed who he really was when pressure was applied. My revenge wasn't in destroying him. It was simply in making sure his true character was visible to those who needed to see it. The greatest revenge, though, was building the company he couldn't. One based on honesty, accountability, and genuine teamwork rather than ego and image. One where we celebrated our successes together and faced our failures with courage. If you've stayed with my story until the end, thank you. Leadership isn't about titles or corner offices. It's about showing up when it matters most. It's about standing beside your team when things get hard. It's about having the courage to speak truth, even when it's easier to stay silent. If this resonated with you, please like and share so others might find something valuable in my experience. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to step up during a crisis when others stepped away? What did you learn? Until next time, remember that your actions speak so much louder than your words. And some messages, like those sent at 3 a.m. when you think no one is watching, reveal more truth than 1,000 carefully crafted presentations.